Hey, and welcome back to another Enscape video. Oh my, what an update. We have Enscape 3.3. That's quite exciting because there's a lot of new features and we're going to take a look at them right now. Now, if at any point that you happen to learn something, which, I mean, you're here for new features, right? So please demolish that like button. It really helps me out a lot. Okay, getting into it now. So Enscape 3.3, very nice stuff. So I'm in just basic Revit file. Use this for a lot of different things, but I've got Enscape here, and the thing we're all excited about, the big thing, the big announcement, everything is in fact the site context. So the site context is pretty interesting in that we can add lots of different models that do make up our site, and in other words, context beyond what is in our actual project on the site of our project, but beyond that. So when we look out and we see things, we don't just see kind of the edge of the world that is a skybox and just a different Enscape setting that we're seeing, some sort of end to our scene. So a little bit more to it than that. So I can click add site context and immediately we get, this pop up and we're supposed to choose a specific location. And so this does in fact take place. This project is in Oslo. So in Oslo now, I know that my project location is right there, which is great. So what I need to do at this point is I can just drag this over, and all I want to do is capture the extents of the contents that I want to end up in my project. And so that, of course I can do this basically get them is however much I want, which there's quite a lot here, and honestly I don't need that much. That's pretty good, and in one sense that's kind of a lot. But with that said, I'm pretty happy with this. My site is fairly centered here. That looks good. And so we can see coming down here, obviously there's my current location, which is close enough, good enough. I can specifically move that right there if I want to, which it makes it even closer. That's my actual project site. And then my site context data, basically what do I want to be imported? What 3D models do I want to serve as my site context? And in general, you probably do want buildings and landmarks. You can turn them off. Streets and sidewalks, you can turn those off too. And then topography. I'm going to import all of this, but I may end up coming back and not wanting the topography because I've done all the topography on this site. So we'll go ahead and click import. And it will literally import it. And this is great because it's using OpenStreetMaps. And that's, if you're not familiar with that, it's a wonderful website. It's basically all free and you can download all kinds of different models and things like that. But that's wonderful. But the fact that Enscape has, in a sense, integrated OpenStreetMaps in a way that where we can absolutely easily utilize this context is amazing. So this is telling me that I have all of this here now. I'm kind of scared to zoom out and see what I see. Now, we will do that. And as of right now, there's not much here just because I have a feeling that all of this information is well below my site or something like that. Because you can see as I hover over these things, I get a wonderful preview of everything. And so I'm going to dive below my site in an attempt to find the context. And sure enough, look at this. This is something I'm going to have to fix later, but basically bringing my model down to match the site context, that's perfectly fine and easy enough. But the great thing about this is that we get literally all the specific buildings. Like if you want to know what a building is, which one, like there you go. That's fantastic. This is, I cannot read this. So maybe Oslo wasn't the best decision, but nonetheless, we can see all the buildings. We have all of the streets. All the streets are labeled, which is amazing. And with that, I have also the full topography. And the great thing about this is I can actually choose to hide this, which I don't want to hide all of it, of course. But I can choose to hide just the buildings, just the street, just the landmarks, things like that. In this case, the topography, maybe I don't want that, but I might want the rest. And so the extra settings that we have here for map data includes update site context. And that means, maybe I actually do want to get a different area, pull a larger area, smaller area, whatever it might be, and we'll update that information. That's easy enough. Edit the site context. Well, there's a lot here. So this is where I would actually go if I wanted to adjust the location, in my case, of my actual context. And I can do that down here at the bottom. I've got actual coordinates for these elements here, which is pretty interesting, pretty cool. I think that's really nice to have, because like me, I don't necessarily want to move my model in Revit. That would be horrible. Not impossible, but also just not something I want to deal with. And so with that said, I can actually move all this up. So if I did want to come up here and attempt to get all of these buildings on the topography that I have nicely built here, and not only topography but somewhat roads as well, I can come over here and, of course, just like we did before, edit site context, and I can see that, all right, there's a lot here to select. Now I obviously need to find what it is that I want to select to bring up. So I need to come in here and I can just select the buildings. And in this case, we could see that I've got my X, my Y, my Z. In this case, it's actually the Y we want if we want to move it up. So with that said, I can put this to 0 and we can see all of our buildings like rise up, which is really great. And I can even zoom out here and start to see, well, look at that. They are starting to populate the scene in a more correct way. Now, if I put this to something higher, obviously they're going to be much higher. And that's obviously too high. So there's some adjustment that needs to be done if you don't have a perfect site. And I'll be honest, I don't, and a lot of people will not. That is something that we can go over in another video, but you can see, boom, I have my site context here. Now, it's obviously not in the right place, so I can physically move this around, and this is kind of awful to try and do, so I wouldn't necessarily do that. So it's a lot of trial and error when it comes to getting this in the right place, especially if you have a full model in place that you don't want to bother moving like I do. And so that's just something that I have to deal with. But besides that, it is pretty easy to move these things around however you want. And so zooming out, I can really start to see, the full context of what I brought in, which is all this information. And like before, I can click all of this and even rotate it, whatever it might be. You can see what happens here, and it's really nice because I could actually spend the time to get this pretty close, and you can see that even just a little bit of adjustment here, and I'm pretty close to where I want to be. So based on all of my information and the best that I could do as far as placing this, obviously I have gathered more site than what I actually have, but I've successfully moved this around. And again, it's not going to be perfect, but you get the idea here. And so the point is, I don't need the topography, and I also don't need the roads because I have them in myself, which is really great. So what I can do at this point is just say, okay, I only want the building, so let's just hide all this stuff. I'll hide all of this, and clearly what's left is, something we could call it good enough. And by good enough, I mean, I actually see things that are there. I know they're floating, that kind of a thing. This is going to work tremendously if you don't have a topography built, if you don't have context or roads or anything built. Obviously, trying to fit this into the context is quite difficult. But besides that, we can also look at the hide overlapping data. And in this case, if I have overlapping data that would be the buildings, the street, or landmarks, basically an internal error or duplicated data that is within OpenStreetMaps or the models that you imported, that's going to be that. And so, that's up to you whether you want to do that or not. I can obviously reset the visibility, and all that will do is show everything that I've hidden, or vice versa, whatever. Reset it to default and show everything. And then finally, I can remove my site context. That's fine. It is what it is. I'm literally removing it. And maybe I want to start fresh and say, yes, let's add the site context, do it all again, that type of thing. Maybe I don't even want to bother importing these things, so I don't even have to worry about moving them around, that kind of a thing. So really interesting stuff. I like the context. It's really cool. I wish we had some default textures that would come with it. Default, I mean, beyond the basic white, but that's okay. That is perfectly okay. And the fact that we have that is just a great step in the right direction. Okay, moving on now to the next thing in Enscape 3.3. We looked at, that's the big thing, definitely for sure. The next thing is kind of small. There are actually going to be a couple of settings, but nonetheless, they're going to be exciting in a way that's going to make your life a bit easier. And that is, we now have the option to add an alpha channel. And this alpha channel is actually the sky. That's not necessarily always the case when it comes to renderings and just images in general, exports. But this is the sky. And so Enscape by default has the sky on a separate layer. It's not technically a layer, but it's another piece of information to Enscape. And so it's basically, we have the option of having that be transparent, which is great. It's one less thing to block out. We don't have to worry about exporting this material ID just to get the sky out and do that, because I know we've all kind of had to use this in the past, and basically just to get the sky out and replace it simply. But now this is going to make it really easy to replace the sky. And so what I'm going to do now is export a quick image and show you how that comes out, just the result. And so let's say, I'm right here, and, I really like the model and everything that I'm looking at, but, I'm really not a fan of the sky. I'm going to end up replacing that myself. Okay, so let's go ahead and export that. So here's my exported image. I will double click it and we can see, boom, that's really cool. That's very easy. I have no sky, like immediately no sky. And that means it's really easy for me to go into Photoshop, boom, and paste in a sky. So let's go ahead and do that. And there we go. There's our sky. Now, do note that it ended up taking the water out as well for some reason. I think that's the material I have, the tone, the whatever it might be. But let's say we want to replace the sky, of course, and we have just this ridiculous sky that obviously is not large enough, but I'll show you how simple this is. Bring this here, obviously put that behind, and then there we go. Look, I mean, that took 2 seconds. I've replaced the sky. Looks great. Obviously the water is a different thing. Don't worry about the water, but the sky's done. It's easy. It looks really nice. So really nice is in it's good enough. Not necessarily what I would call a finished product, but nonetheless, that is the alpha channel. The next checkbox, which I think is way overdue, but yet this is probably the most minute checkbox you will ever come across. So whenever we use Enscape and we've got Revit here, well, the second I click Revit, I lose Enscape, and that's fine. I'm used to that, and so I can work in Revit, do what I need to do, and it will update Enscape, and I can just Alt-Tab back in. Not a big deal. But if I don't want to do that and I want to leave Enscape here, in other words, pin this whole window above Revit or above whatever program you're using Enscape with, I can come over to the settings, preferences, and then pin Enscape window on top of host application. Host application being Revit, Rhino, ArchiCAD, SketchUp, anything like that, whatever Enscape is used with. And all that means is as soon as I click Revit, nothing happens. At least nothing happens to Enscape. And I love this. This is so simple. This is really one of those simple things that everyone should love. It really is the small things. But this just simply allows me to continue working and move things around, get an idea of what I need to do in Revit, of course, but see it immediately and just stay oriented to whatever I'm working on in Enscape. All right, and of course, we can't have an Enscape update without an asset library update. More, and that's fine. We always love this. This is more that we have to play with. And of course, if we go to all the new assets, we can see, of course, filter here by these new assets. We get a bunch of educational assets. Great for schools, things like that. Of course, you're going to get a ton of these types of things. All kind, like I'm really surprised how many there are. Even a metal detector. I guess you find those in schools now. Tons of things here. More than just school stuff, I would say. There's these little animals and whatnot. Telescopes are really nice. Lots of stuff. So nothing too crazy, but always more and always good to see. And what I would say is probably the next biggest update in Enscape 3.3 would be the fact that we can override materials, and that's fantastic. So I'm going to bring Enscape over here just so we can get an idea of what we're looking at. But let's say we're looking at this concrete and it looks more marbly than a concrete. And I will say this is one of the concretes that came with Enscape that I imported and whatnot. So, but I want to replace this, it's not quite the decent concrete that I'm looking for. So let's go to our material library, of course, and we can see that, I'll show you which one I used just so we know. Concrete 4 right there. So maybe we don't want that one necessarily. So we don't need to go there. We actually need to go to the Enscape material editor, because at this point you can think of this as editing a material because we're going to end up replacing it. And so, of course, when we go to our Enscape material editor, we can see all of the different materials I have in my project, which is an immense amount. I do apologize for that. But of course, the thing to be aware of is that we want to look for what is used in, what is come from Enscape basically. And so I know that this material is actually the concrete 04. And the cool thing is here, of course, I can click on it, but now we can see this replaced with Enscape material, which is awesome. And now the cool thing about that also is that it doesn't have to be an Enscape material already. Obviously, I did start with an Enscape material, but I'll show you in a second that we actually don't have to have that. And so I still want this to be concrete because that makes sense. But I can simply just click all of these and get an updated preview of what it looks like. This is fantastic, really easy. And this is, I'm going to call it non-committal because I'm just looking at it. This is more of a preview. And I say preview because I haven't technically replaced it. So let's say we like this number 9 because I see more texture, but it looks kind of like a basic concrete that we're used to, finished basic concrete that we're used to seeing. So then I can click replace. And so this is really where what we see happening is, of course, it's replaced and we like that, but it is actually replacing it in Revit. And so it's reflecting that in Enscape, not just through this preview window. And of course, we can see that this is absolutely updating now. But there's one more caveat that I want you to be aware of when it comes to doing this and replacing these materials. And that is, if I come to my actual materials in Revit, this window pops up, of course. And we want to actually go to this material. And what I'm going to ultimately show you is maybe not what you're expecting. I don't know. So here's Concrete 4. And so obviously, clicking on Concrete 4, when I go to the Appearance tab, I can see that, yeah, it's still, the name is still Concrete 4, which is the original Enscape material that I use. But the interesting thing, and the thing I'm not necessarily a fan of, but I get it. I see Concrete 09. So basically it's, of course, I replaced Concrete 04 with 09. That's the type of thing that you need to know, is that the name of the material will not be updated. Not at all. And that's just because the only thing that's changing is the appearance asset. Totally fine. It's just something to be aware of, which is why I'm bringing it to your attention whenever you ultimately do this. You're not searching for Concrete 04 within this Concrete 04 material because you replaced it with 09, that type of thing. So, okay. Now, finally, I do want to show you again what happens when I replace a material that's not an Enscape material. Not to say that we would get a different result, but it works all the same. Now, I will say, offhand, I don't know what this material is, and I don't want to necessarily have to go back to Revit and find out what that is. So the good way to do that is go to BIM, and I can simply click on this element, and I can see, and of course, there's the name of the element, but I really want to know the material so we can access it directly here without having to look it up in Revit. So depending on the type of element that you have, you might be able to scroll down and see, okay, look, materials and finishes. In this case, structural material or whatever material, it is _cage. So great to know. I can scroll to the top and see, look, _cage. I can get out of the BIM because I don't need that anymore, but I can go right here and replace. And I want this to be more of a stainless looking metal, things like that. So click on the metal and we can see, well, these aluminums will be fine. But the cool thing is I can simply, that's it. Boom. One click and it's done. Updated, good to go. And obviously this looks really good. Not quite the rough steel. I mean, you can get kind of crazy with this, of course. But the nice thing is it's so simple. And I don't want quite like that. And so there we go. That looks good. So I'm going to replace this. And suddenly this is like 10 times better. And not only that, this is the nice part, I would say. I went ahead and went to the trouble of making that material myself. I named it _cage because that's what it was, what I wanted it to be. And now I have replaced that material with an Enscape material. And that's great because not only do I keep the cage name, but I now have an Enscape asset applied to the appearance, which is wonderful. That's literally the whole point here. That's what I want. So really cool stuff. That's going to be really easy to run around your project in Enscape and replace everything that is just some kind of dummy generic material. Or if it's one you actually made like we just went through, then it's really easy to, of course, keep the naming that you want to keep, but replace the asset itself, which is fantastic. Okay, and the last thing is it's very simple. They've done some updates to glass so that you can, in the glass, you can see reflections. Of course, we've always been able to see reflections, but we can now get a better quality of reflections that specifically have translucent materials. So like imagine seeing glass in glass, or seeing a reflection of another window that is showing the sky, like that kind of thing. And so that is a very small update and nothing you need to worry about, but just know that the quality of glass and reflections in Enscape is not only better, but it will allow you to see more of what's actually there when it comes to real reflection. So that will do it for Enscape 3.3. There's a lot of cool stuff. I'm going to definitely use the site context. That's really good to do. Depending on the site, it's probably going to be easier or harder to use. So kind of plan on when to use that, and replacing, and you might even say, and as I use it more, I might be that replacing the material asset is replacing the material with an Enscape material is probably the most, really the biggest update of 3.3. But leave in the comment section below what your favorite Enscape 3.3 update is. Mine is probably the materials. As exciting as the site is, it's probably the replacing of the materials, because it's so easy to select through them and then finally replace them whenever you've selected them. So that will do it for this video. Have a wonderful day, and thank you very much for watching.